Hi everybody, it's your Human Anatomy and Physiology teacher, and with this video we are going to be wrapping up our unit on the respiratory system. In this video we're going to talk about breathing mechanics, and we're also going to talk about some respiratory diseases. So how do you actually breathe? How is it possible for you to breathe? Well, it's really because of skeletal muscle. Two sets of muscles, your diaphragm and your intercostal muscles, simply changing how much pressure, how much air pressure is within your thoracic cavity. And when your diaphragm and your intercostal muscles, more specifically your diaphragm, makes it so that there's less pressure in your thoracic cavity than there is outside, that's when air comes in. And when there's more pressure on the inside than there is on the outside in the atmosphere, that's when air goes out. That's called expiration. So inspiration, that's breathing in. You're not really sucking air in, more it's just like a change in pressure in your thoracic cavity, so air just goes where air is always going to move from a system of high pressure to low pressure, and if there's less pressure in your thoracic cavity, air is going to rush in. Okay, that's what inspiration is called. Okay, did you get inspired by that? But yeah, your diaphragm and intercostal muscles contract, so your diaphragm is kind of like a dome shape like this, and when it contracts, it kind of flattens out so that your chest cavity expands, and that you have less pressure in here than you do on the outside, so that air rushes in. External air is pulled into the lungs due to an increased volume. Okay, so we can study gas laws like Boyle's law and figure out that the difference between pressure and volume. If you increase the pressure, if you increase the volume, decrease the pressure. So by increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity, you're decreasing the pressure and thus forcing air in. That's called inspiration. Expiration is the opposite. As your diaphragm relaxes, again, it's like this dome-shaped muscle. If it's flattened out while you're breathing in, it kind of goes back to being a dome shape while you're breathing out. That will decrease the amount of volume in your chest cavity, thus increasing the pressure, and increasing the pressure more so than it is outside in the atmosphere, so that air is forced out. Okay, air is going to move from high pressure to low pressure, and if you have higher pressure on the inside, air is going to go right back out. Okay, so expiration is caused by muscles relaxing. Air is pushed out of the lungs. Forced expiration, like I'm doing now, speaking, yelling, or singing, can occur by contracting intercostal muscles to depress the rib cage. Okay, intercostal. What are intercostal muscles again? I don't think I went over that yet, but they are the muscles in between your ribs. Okay, so you have muscles in between your ribs that are changing the size of your thoracic cavity. And with the diaphragm and those intercostal muscles, they're changing the amount of volume and pressure in your thoracic cavity to force air in and force air out. Okay, that's how breathing works. We're going to be building a model of this later on in this class, and you'll see exactly what we mean by forcing air in and out. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of terms. Let's talk about respiratory volumes and capacities. Okay, so every time you inspire and expire, there's a certain amount of volume of air each time that you do that. Okay, so when you're breathing normally, okay, when I'm not talking, or when you're not even thinking about breathing, you're probably the way you're probably breathing right now, even though that might change now that I'm letting you know it's happening. It's called your tidal volume, your normal breath, and that's about 500 milliliters of air. That's like, I had a water bottle here a moment ago, but that's about the size of a water bottle. Okay, that's how much air that you breathe in, just normally, just sitting around, sleeping, doing whatever, when you're not necessarily thinking about breathing, right? When you let your medulla oblongata take over and just let yourself breathe on your own. Okay, but vital capacity is a term for the maximum quantity of air in one breath. Here we go. That was silly that I just did that, but yeah, what I just demonstrated is your vital capacity, the maximum quantity of air that you can take in one breath, and that can be anywhere from 4,500 to 5,500 milliliters. Okay, so that's quite a bit more if you think about it. 2 liters is 2,000 milliliters, so you could take in almost up to 5.5 liters of air with your vital capacity. Okay, individuals that exercise more and do more aerobic exercise are going to have a higher vital capacity. They will have adjusted more to taking in more oxygen. So like a marathon runner or a sprinter or a swimmer, that kind of thing. Somebody that does a lot of aerobic exercise is going to have a really big vital capacity. Okay, there's always a little bit of air in the conducting zone. In the conducting zone, meaning between, like, your respiratory tract and your lungs. So that's called dead space, or that's called residual volume. And it's air that remains in the conducting zone and it never reaches the alveoli. Okay, so no matter how much you breathe out, there's always a little bit of air in your respiratory tract, and that's called your residual volume. Okay, so if we add the vital capacity, the total amount of air that you can intake or outtake, plus your residual volume, that is called your total lung capacity, and that is the maximum amount of air your lungs can hold in terms of volume. And it's usually about 4,650 milliliters to 6,400 milliliters. Okay, so think about that. A 2-liter bottle of like Pepsi or whatever, right? That's 2 liters. Okay, your lungs can hold up to 3 times that amount of air, which is quite a bit. Give yourself some credit here. Okay, 2 other terms that I'm not going to necessarily ask you to know, but the inspiratory reserve volume, that is the difference between the tidal volume and the vital capacity, what you can breathe in, and the expiratory reserve volume is the difference between tidal volume and vital capacity as what you can breathe out. Okay, so if I'm breathing just regular tidal volume and then I exhale a little bit more, that's demonstrating the expiratory reserve. And if I'm just regular breathing using tidal volume and then I intake, that's called inspiratory reserve volume. Okay, same thing over here. Here's it might be a clearer picture. Here is a vital capacity. It's inspiratory reserve, tidal, and expiratory reserve volume. Yeah, sorry, I got a text. That's called our vital capacity, and there's our residual volume, but the total lung capacity is all of this together. Okay, so that's a little bit about breathing. Now let's get into when breathing doesn't work properly. Let's talk about a few respiratory diseases. Pneumonia is more of a symptom, but we'll talk about that in a second. The first one we'll discuss is tuberculosis, or TB. It's a bacterial infection of your lung, and it can cause coughing for over 3 weeks. It can cause fever, weakness. Hey, you can get tested for tuberculosis, and you have to. It's extremely contagious. You have to get tested for tuberculosis in any medical setting if you want a job there. So I used to work at a cafe in a hospital, and I had to get a TB test to work there. So that you don't spread it around. It's super contagious. It's bacteria in your lungs. Every time you breathe it out, there it goes. It sounds familiar, right? So pneumonia is an alveolar infection. That means that the alveoli, the tiny little sacs of air that fill up and allow for gas exchange, they're wrapped with capillaries, are infected, and that can be caused by many pathogens, including coronavirus 19, SARS-CoV-2. Can cause pneumonia, and that's actually something that COVID does. It infects your alveoli, those particular areas of gas exchange. Okay, and so when COVID can get complicated, in bad cases, you can end up with pneumonia. And what this can cause is can cause the alveoli to fill with fluid, and once they're filled with fluid, it makes it really, really, really tough to breathe. And you need to get rid of that fluid somehow, and that pneumonia can cause a fever, and it can cause a lot of chest pain and a cough. And in very, very bad cases, pneumonia or anything that causes pneumonia can lead to sepsis. So remember, each of the alveoli are surrounded by capillaries, right? So they have a very close connection with the cardiovascular system. So if it gets really, really bad, that infection in your alveoli, if it gets into the capillaries, then it's free reign to go wherever it wants in your body. Okay, that's bad. That's called sepsis when that occurs. When that infection enters into your cardiovascular system, and then remember, your cardiovascular system is like a super highway all around your body. It can go wherever it wants now and cause damage along the way. That's bad. That's called sepsis. Okay. Asthma, very, very common. asthma is an allergic reaction to foreign particles. A buildup of mucus, I should say there we go. Buildup of mucus irritates smooth muscle and causes bronchoconstriction, and it causes wheezing or impaired air movement. So check it out. It's very similar to, it's almost the same as having bronchitis, almost a little bit. So asthma, this is an allergic reaction, which means your body is reacting to something that should not be in there. That's what really allergic reactions are. Histamine is released by cells, and that's going to cause cells to start to inflame and start to react, right? So here's a normal bronchial tube. It's got a nice little passage for air. It's got all sorts of capillaries around it. And if it's inflamed or it's triggered, the asthma is triggered, the smooth muscle is tightened. It causes bronchoconstriction, broncho meaning the bronchial trees, right? And constriction meaning it's closing. And then it's going to swell a little bit and mucus will build up, and this person cannot breathe. So albuterol, what this little guy is taking with his inhaler, is an antihistamine, which means that it's going to counteract what the histamine the molecules did in here and sending a signal to other cells to start to react and constrict and stuff. Okay, the albuterol, the antihistamine, is going to reduce the swelling and tell that smooth muscle to relax a little bit, okay, so that this little guy can breathe, right? So this is an allergic response to something, and that's caused by basically your own immune system, and you can counteract that with an antihistamine, okay? So yeah, people with asthma need to be very, very careful and carry their inhaler in the event that that happens. Okay, another big disease that you may have heard of before with regards to the respiratory system is emphysema, and that is a progressive lung disease. It causes shortness of breath. It's inflammation of these very fickle, vulnerable alveoli. Once again, it destroys their elasticity. Okay, so each of those alveoli are like little balloons, almost little sacs, right? And I don't want to continue the notion that your lungs are like balloons. Okay, but the alveoli, the tiny little microscopic sacs, they are kind of like balloons. And emphysema, smoking, can destroy the elasticity of them. Okay, so they won't be able to expand much, and you can't really take in as much air. Your tidal volume and your vital capacity decrease by a lot if your alveoli can't expand and they can't healthily take in the amount of air that they should. Okay, so here's some normal functional alveoli. I'm sure we've seen something like this a lot of times. But normal functional alveoli as opposed to emphysema alveoli, they're not as elastic, they're not stretchy, they can't expand to let more air in. Okay, so here's emphysema. The ducts are compressed as well, and the alveoli collapse, and they don't have elasticity anymore. Okay, last thing we'll talk about here is bronchitis. And it's very similar to asthma. I'm sure you've heard of it before, or you've had it before. It's very common. It's an inflammation. I really messed this up. It's an inflammation of the bronchial lining, and it produces a discolored mucus. So when you're coughing up like phlegm, okay, it's the mucus produced by your mucosal layer that's supposed to be there all the time. When it builds up when your bronchi are inflamed, and so you cough it up and you get phlegm. That's bronchitis, or a chest cold. All right, that is it for this unit. Please let me know if you have any questions, and we will see you in our next unit.